So we will make a start now. So I'd like to welcome you all to this Farm Advisory Service webinar tonight, and thank you all very much for attending. My name's Jeanette Sutherland. I'm based in the SAC office in Portree, and I've got my colleague Mary, who's going to be, as she has done already, we've already put her to work with helping with technical questions and monitoring the Q&As and the chat and everything. So delighted that my colleague Mary is here, but most of all, I'm delighted that we've got our guest speaker, Bjorn Richards from NatureScot with us tonight. Like I said before, Bjorn is going to lead us through his presentation, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end of the session. So if you'd like to type your queries in the Q&A box as the questions arise, that's absolutely fine. And then we'll be able to track them and make sure that Bjorn doesn't get to go home until we've got all the questions answered for the night. And like I say, like we've done before, if you do have any IT glitches or anything, just pop a comment in the chat and myself and Mary will try and fix that. So this webinar is being recorded, like I said, because we're hoping that it'll be a resource for when you are wanting to do your Muirburn licensing applications later on, that this will send you an edited recording, so you won't get all our chat at the start, that the edited recording will be a useful resource for you. So without any more further ado, I'd really like to welcome Bjorn, who is a Policy and Licensing Officer within NatureScot's Wildlife Management activity. And he's been very busy in the last 18 months working within the team that's been developing the Muirburn licensing policy following the introduction of the Wildlife Management and Muirburn Scotland Act 2024. And we're very fortunate because Bjorn has a background in agriculture and is also a crofter in Sutherland. So welcome, Bjorn. Thank you so much. And I'll let you take the meeting away.
Thank you, Jeanette. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending. I think the biggest thing I'd like to get out of this for all of you is that whilst I'll give you the presentation, I think most of the information or better information will be gained from questions and answers at the end. So please engage and ask me what you'd like to know, particularly if I've missed a subject. So without further ado, I'll get into my presentation and then we can go from there. So current situation, so licenses are, or the legal requirement for licenses will be introduced by the 15th of September. Fundamentally, the statutory instruments that make the Wildlife and Muirburn Act part of law have been put before Parliament, and therefore that will be in place by September. Therefore, the ability to apply for a license we expect to be available sort of from mid-July, which, as you will all see, is very much around the corner. The Muirburn Code, a revised code, we had looked to publish it slightly earlier, but it will be published ahead of or alongside the license application opening. To put a point to the Muirburn Code, currently we have had some concern from stakeholders raised, and we are reviewing their concerns before we're publishing it. Likewise, the licensing guidance will be made available as part of the application process. So how did we get here? Fundamentally, this was introduced by the Wildlife Management and Muirburn Scotland Act in 2024. Now, it's been subject to a couple of delays through Scottish Parliament, but fundamentally it is now all in place. It was recently amended in the early part of this year by the Natural Environment Act. And the Natural Environment Act actually did a couple of things. It introduced training purposes within the Muirburn Act, and it also removed a statutory requirement that when you were burning on peatland previously, you had to prove that no other means of vegetation control were practicable, whereas that has been removed completely. So that makes it slightly more manageable for individuals seeking Muirburn licenses. There are 12 licensable purposes set out in the Act, and the Act also has redefined peatland to 40 centimetres or more than 40 centimetres. The previous depth for peatland that has been used is more than 50 centimetres, so it has cast a grey area, but I'll come back to that further in the presentation. The Muirburn season has also been changed within the Act, so it brings it forward into mid-September, but it also ends the season at the 31st of March. This will be quite an interesting one because I know that a lot of burning tends to happen early April, etc., when the weather improves. It also introduces a requirement for mandatory training, and mandatory training goes for all participants in Muirburn. So, in other words, whilst the license holder can be trained, everyone else that is assisting the license holder on the day doing Muirburn will need to have been qualified as well. And ultimately, there will be the opportunity to apply for a license for up to 5 years. So 5 seasons worth of Muirburn from one application. So coming into the licensing purposes, they're broken down into 2 separate things. So they're broken down into non-peatland purposes and peatland purposes. The non-peatland purposes need to be considered that what you're doing needs to be considered as appropriate, whereas for the peatland purposes, it needs to be appropriate and necessary. Fundamentally, for the non-peatland purposes, clearly there are more, and it allows for managing the habitats of moorland game and wildlife, and also improving grazing potential of moorland for livestock. Whilst the peatland purposes, easy for me to say, are a bit more restrictive and have a reduced amount of purposes there, with the addition of requiring to be necessary. So the link that I put in the top of the chat window, so you should all have access to this will take you to the page on the NatureScot website, which will allow you to view and follow how to prepare for Muirburn licensing, and it will give you lots of detail in terms of what you can and can't do, etc. You'll see in this picture here that there's an error code showing on the YouTube video. It's something to do with our website. It won't let it show the start screen, but that link will still take you to the video, and you will still be able to view it. I would highly recommend that if you're intending to apply for a Muirburn license, that you do click on this and follow through on the guidance there, and it'll give you a bit more detail than perhaps I can give you tonight. So I mentioned about the change of depth of peatland and how that's come about. So fundamentally, peatland mapping or soil mapping across Scotland was originally done by the John Hutton Institute, and where they looked at peatland, they established a minimum value of 50 centimetres. Therefore, the mapping that we have available to us looks at peatland at 50 centimetres. With the Act inserting a depth of greater than 40 centimetres, what it does is it puts in what we would term uncertain areas. So we know areas that are clearly non-peatland at all, sandy loams, whatever it might be, and we know what was considered peatland, which is greater than 50 centimetres, and then there's this uncertain area. So therefore, we've provided a tool for you to be able to go and map your holding and determine if you have peatland on your ground, whether you have uncertain ground or non-peatland ground. This app, again, through that link that I showed earlier, you'll be able to click on it, put the outline of your holding on it, or if you have a shapefile for a larger holding, etc., you can upload that. It will then interpolate what the ground levels are, and it will show you where you may have peatland, uncertain areas, or non-peatland. For the biggest one for you is for uncertain areas. So uncertain areas, if you would like to burn for non-peatland purposes, you will need to show that they are not peatland. And to do this, you will be required to do peat depth sampling of those uncertain areas. Effectively, peat depth sampling will be given to you in 100-metre grids, and you would need to use a peat probe and record the depth of the peat or the ground that you are measuring. There is also a template that is provided there, and you would fill that in and return it as part of your license application. Top tip number one, please ensure that you use the template that is provided with your return, that if because the computer or the licensing system will automatically read that template and upload it. If you don't use that, then it will cast an error and we'll have to send it back to you for amendment. If you have peatland or showing on the map as peatland and you feel that the map is wrong, you're also able to sample that ground and return to us that information. And if your evidence shows that it's not peatland, then it will be recategorized within your licensing application. So the Muirburn Code, it's been developed collaboratively through the Muirburn Code Working Group with stakeholders from effectively all stakeholders, including Scottish Gamekeepers Association, NFU, etc. It sets out legal requirements associated with Muirburn and also sets out musts and must-nots associated with the license. And that effectively tells you what you can and can't do and gives you limitations, etc. But it also signposts best practice, so it tells you things that you should consider doing, etc. As I said before, it is currently under review on a couple of the points that have been raised against it. So how will licensing work? So you will need to provide a map showing where Muirburn is going to be carried out and show where peatland and non-peatland areas are. So the map that you will provide is actually online and you will draw it as part of your licensing application, or you'll be able to upload a shapefile, which enables you just to upload your holding if you have it on a shapefile. If you don't worry, you'll just be able to draw it physically on the map. We'll also be looking to define peatland and non-peatland areas. Our assumption will be that the map that looks at peatland and non-peatland, i.e. the original base map, is correct unless you provide different details within that template I mentioned earlier. And then you will need to provide supporting evidence for each licensable purpose that you're applying for. And that is done through questions that we have on the licensing system. So you will see when you initially go to apply, there'll be multiple pages, but one of which will be all your details, etc. When it comes to drawing your Muirburn area, you can, as you can see around down here, add new area by drawing it manually, opening a shapefile, or you could even use your location code, etc. So that's worth looking at and doing as you go. Obviously, if it is location code or field IDs, please just double check and make sure that the database is up to date, etc. This is a snapshot from the screen of what the things you might see within the license application. So you'll be asked for your personal details and you'll go into that menu and fill all of that in. You'll be asked to select the licensable purposes that you are requesting. And within that, it'll define whether it's peatland and non-peatland, etc. I would suggest, and I've had quite a few questions on this already, so I'll say it up front now. If you're on non-peatland and you are applying to improve grazing for livestock, please consider that as your primary purpose and click on it. I think it's very tempting for everyone to click on all the purposes because we all feel that we are doing an element of that or each of the purposes, but really consider what your primary purpose is and select that, and that should keep it simple for you. If you do need some of the other purposes, by all means, do click on that as well. Once you've selected your purposes, it'll take you to the survey map where you'll be able to upload any data that you had and select your area, etc. And then down the bottom, reasons for Muirburn, you will be able to complete the questions that have been generated from you selecting which purposes you would like to do. This is a fully electronic system, so and the other point of it is that you will be able to return to it. So don't feel that you need to fill it all in one go. As long as you've completed the contact details, it will be saved and you will get a link to go back to it, and you'll be able to get in and out and fill in the application as you go. So in terms of assessment of the licenses, we will obviously the licensing officers will be responsible for assessing what you've written. If we need further advice, we will speak to habitat and species advisors as we go. We will be providing a guidance document for everyone. So when you are filling in the application, the licensing guidance document, I would strongly advise that you have that open and be able to sort of review and look at the type of things and information that we're looking for. It gives you clear guidance on that detail that we need. And then fundamentally, if we're satisfied that your Muirburn is appropriate or appropriate and necessary for peatland purposes, then you will be granted a license. You do not need to apply for 12 different licenses. You can apply for one license with 12 different purposes within it. So what will your license look like? Fundamentally, at the end, a map will be produced to you, which breaks down the peatland and non-peatland areas. And on the map, it will also tell you what purposes have been approved. You will be able to manipulate the license and select that you see peatland only or non-peatland only. And you will therefore be able to apply your specific purposes for that. You will also be able to download this data onto GPSs or other mobile equipment that is suitable for that, etc. Wildfire purposes are slightly more complex in that we are looking to establish what the risk is and how you're going to mitigate against the risk. In effect, you'll be asked to also provide an annotated map of your holding, explain what you want to burn and what is the risk, and describe how you will use that Muirburn to prevent wildfire. So it might be I'm creating fire breaks or targeting reducing fuel load in a specific area. And all these details will be provided to a wildfire burn plan that is provided within the application process. So what will that look like? In effect, let's pretend this is your holding, the black outline. You will then select or draw on your map, and this can be hand drawn. Please don't feel that it has to be digital. It can be hand drawn and just scanned in. But you circle the areas that you want to burn for wildfire purposes. There is a risk assessment spreadsheet that you will then fill in, and for whatever area, let's say area 3, you will explain the risk and you will explain how you're going to conduct wildfire prevention for that. This is particularly pertinent as well to peatland areas because this risk assessment will help you justify why it is necessary and not just appropriate. So ultimately, this is a pictorial sort of depiction of what that will then inform us. Remember, as the licensing officers, we don't know your ground and we don't know what your plan is in your head. So give us as much detail as you can. That will help us understand what you're trying to achieve and also help us understand the necessity of it. Within the license and within the Act, there's a requirement for return data and requirement for compliance of the Muirburn Code. So there will be simple questions asked to you on an annual basis, which you will submit back to us and explain how you've done it and how you've complied with the code. These aren't arduous, but please ensure that you do return them so that your license continues. So that is my brief canter through the licensing process and where we're at, and therefore I'll welcome any questions.
Well, Bjorn, thank you very much. That was a very quick and succinct run through, so I'm sure there'll be lots of questions coming. So if you'd like to just start typing in the Q&A box any of your questions, and again, you know, it's all quite new, so if you've got some more, you know, questions not just about the licensing but about the Muirburn changes, then please do ask. Don't be scared. Great, so we've got questions coming in. So first one is we've got Kate would like you to explain the mapping requirement in more detail.
Yes. And can I check, Kate, is that around deciding whether your ground is peatland or non-peatland, or around the mapping of the license?
About how you identify the sites that we're wanting to do the Muirburn on.
All right. Okay. So fundamentally, for that side of things, if you would like to do Muirburn on, it literally is when you go into the license application, you will either draw your areas. This can be separate areas, i.e., you only want to burn within 2 or 3 areas within your holding. It could also be for your whole holding, uh, or it could be for a couple of holdings that you own, or are the occupier of. Uh, Within that, literally all it is the map system that is provided to you will guide you on that, but literally is a click box, and you will just press the button and draw the border around it. You don't need to be pedantic, as in following every contour or following that every bend of the burn, etc. You just put in the general area, and the mapping should draw to it. If you do have farm codes, etc., if you put those in, it will highlight that to you already, so that will make it easier.
Great. And when you were mentioning about shape files for farm codes, if people are using the Rural Payments website, you should be able to download your own shape files for your farm holdings on that, which might be useful when it comes to this purpose. We had a wee follow-up question from Kate. In England, you need to give 8-figure OS grid reference. Do we need to do that in Scotland? Or does the mapping app do it for us?
In effect, the mapping app does it for you by you drawing the borders around what you're going to do. So the map will provide that.
Fantastic. So we've got a question about training. Who is providing and paying for training?
So I will answer the awkward question first. Who is paying for training? Currently, the license applicant or whoever wants to conduct Muirburn is paying for training. I do know that there were some schemes that, uh, and I'm not sure exactly what ones there were, but there were through some various schemes that people could apply for some funding for that training. Whether that still exists, I don't know. In terms of who's providing the training, it's a Lantra approved course, but fundamentally the only training provider in Scotland is Brightspark. A point to note on training, obviously, there's going to be a bow wave of people requiring training. The legislation requires everyone to be trained. However, if you find yourself in a position where you have applied to be on a training course, but there is no availability, etc., and you may have done the initial part, which is the online part of it, please get in touch with us and discuss it with us, because we may be able to give some leniency, particularly for the first year, etc.
Fantastic. And the Farm Advisory Service and NatureScot have information about all the training on their websites. So there's, like Bjorn said, there's the online and then there's the practical. But of course, the practical, like all our Muirburn, has to be done within the season and the weather has to be correct. So there has been a wee bit of some backlogs. Now we've got maybe a more difficult question for you next. What happens if your license is refused, but you need to burn to maintain the hill in good livestock wildlife condition?
Uh, I think it really depends, and fundamentally, at base level, the trite answer would be you would not be allowed to burn to do that. Uh, I think, though, perhaps the question needs to think of whether it's actually about peatland and non-peatland. Like I said before, if you have non-peatland and you have a valid purpose, the law already says that that is appropriate. So as long as you're intending to, follow the Muirburn code and do those kind of things, there should be no reason that you wouldn't get it for a non-peatland purpose. Peatland purposes are more restrictive, but fundamentally the law does not allow for burning for livestock on peatland.
And if people did a license and it got rejected, they'd be given reasons why, so they'd be able to reapply, wouldn't they, if they fell for some
Yes,
misunderstanding?
absolutely. and what I'd like to think, and bear with me on this because I will make a promise and then someone will say he promised and didn't happen. But we are a small team having to obviously issue these licenses. But before we got to that point, we would correspond with you and probably look for that extra detail that we may or may not need. So please be assured that we wouldn't just reject it out of hand. And as long as you come back to us with the required information, then we would look to help you in terms of making sure we get the detail we need. The other thing to note as well is this is new to all of us, and it will be an iterative process. So, in other words, we will also be learning on the job to some degree, and we will have a better understanding of what people are applying for once we get into sort of the license application window.
Fantastic. And then there was a question about going back to the funding question, and there was a question of would the next generation funding cover this? And I think there's quite a few funds, and Mary might keep me right on this as well. There's new entrants training funding available at the moment. There's also women in ag training funding available at the moment. And I'm not sure if there was in the past peatland there was some peatland action funding training, so it's worth keeping an eye on all these things because yeah, the more help and the more people in an area that get the training, so then you've a viable team so that the Muirburn can go ahead. You know, if some people might be on holiday or working offshore, you want each area really needs a good number of people to be trained to make that work. Next question we've got. Okay. When all this is to be reviewed as to if and how it's working and what the impacts are on crofting communities and the wider public.
The legislation requires that it's all reviewed every 5 years. I would say that there is enough public attention and enough ministerial attention to say that probably, in terms of how licensing is working, etc., will probably come earlier than that. However, would it be a formal review? No, I think that comes as part of what I was saying, that iterative approach. But a formal review is every 5 years as set out within the legislation.
Excellent, thank you. Now I've got a question for myself, just jumping in when there's none in the Q&A. You were talking about the app will give us coordinates and then we'll do peat probes for the classifying the land. Could you maybe just explain like in a wee bit more detail? So you get told the coordinates, and so then like practically would people be able to get the coordinates on a mobile device, and what do they need to use like as a peat probe? Can you use a bamboo cane or you know just some of
Yeah.
the more day-to-day
So,
aspects of making that happen?
so what I'll do is, if it's okay, I'll demo that, and I'll share my screen in 1 second. In terms of peat probe, you can use a bamboo cane, and all you have to do is mark it every 5 centimeters. Ultimately, what you're looking to do is, if the peatland is greater than 40 centimeters, then round it up to the nearest 5 centimeters that you've got on your cane. So bear with me 1 second. I will share a window. Is that showing?
Yeah, we're seeing that. We're seeing the whole of Scotland.
Yep. So that link that I showed you will take you to a further link where you can look at your ground and determine whether it's peatland, non-peatland, or uncertain areas. Effectively, it'll bring you to a broader map of Scotland, and there are some options for you here. You can draw an area, you can open your shapefile, you can get results, and you can reset the map if you've made a mistake, etc. Fundamentally, for me, I find it easier just to click on the map and scroll using my mouse wheel to zoom in as to where I'm required. So, and for this demo purpose, it doesn't really matter. I'll try and pick an open area. There you go. So what I now need to do is draw an area. So I click on draw area, and fundamentally I just start on my border and work my way around. And you can click as many bits of it as you require to help you determine what you need. To stop drawing that area, you will double click at your start point. I'll just zoom in slightly. So now you can click the blue button and get results. This now is calculating, based on the base map, what it thinks the ground is. So a big point to note here is that this white screen, and we'll come back to it, but this has got all those bits of detail that you need and what you need to download. However, it's in the way of the picture. So the first thing you want to see is the picture. So if you close the X, don't worry, you can get back into it. What I'm seeing here right now is that this area I've drawn, everything in green is uncertain. So it is less than 50 centimeters. Everything in purple is certain as peat because it's from the John Hutton original mapping, which is greater than 50 centimeters. And then there are some other overlays like woodland, etc., which, or in this case, loch down here, which it would exclude for you. All these black dots in this case are areas that it would want you to sample if you wanted to prove that it was not peatland. And I need to be clear on that, because if you're content that you don't need to apply for a non-peatland purpose and you just want to apply for a peatland purpose, you don't need to do the sampling. We will just assume it's peatland and use those rules against it. Going back to your results, because great picture on your screen, but you need something. So in order to go back to get results, that will now give you these points. So you can download your survey points as an XLS spreadsheet. So if you didn't even have a GPS, that spreadsheet will give you the coordinates that you need to go to and do your peat depth sampling. You can then also download GPX points, so that would be for some kind of navigation equipment that you may or may not have. And then you can go from there. You will also see here peatland area. If you're in doubt that that purple peatland that's shown within that holding is peat, you can also generate survey points and prove to us by doing your sampling that that is not peatland, or that it is peatland, and we go from there. Any questions on that, Jeanette?
So you know how there's, I'm sorry, maybe I'm being really thick here, so apologies in advance. You know how there's like lots and lots of dots. I
Yes.
take it you don't need to. Is it a certain number that they're asking you to do of those dots?
It is one dot every 100 meters. So that's a fairly zoomed out map, but yeah. So unfortunately,
Yeah.
within a kilometre
So
square,
that,
that's a lot of dots. That's a lot of samples.
right.
That and I'll talk to that because that will be a question. Why do we need so many? That is the standard sampling distance that is used, not only for peatland, etc., but it's also used for forestry purposes, etc., etc. So it is an accredited sampling measurement. And the reason that this is important is that effectively the computer system will then take your data and it will interpret everything and draw lines of equal depths effectively. So it will be able to then create a nice or proper pictured map as opposed to just giving you a big blob saying, you know, this whole square is peatland, because it's unlikely that it is. It will then define the kind of islands in between.
Okay. And can I just ask a supplementary question?
Yes.
What kind of time, you know, like as somebody who's never done peat probes before, if I was
Yeah.
thinking I was going to do peat probes for that red box, like what kind of time would that take? Would be that, is that
It
like a
really
day's
depends on your
work?
terrain. Yeah, it really depends on your terrain. Ultimately, I mean, I've picked quite a big area here. That will take quite a while. I think professional peat depth samplers will do that in a couple of days, but for you, that could take a
Right.
long time. Another point to make, and that really does raise a good point though, when you do your application, you don't need to apply for your whole holding initially. You also don't need to prove your peat depth samples for your whole holding initially. So prioritize the areas you want. There will be an amendment process or the ability to amend your license with further detail, within the sort of next season or whatever. So you will be able to come back to your license and request an amendment if you have further information.
That's really useful. Thank you.
Jeanette, could I just jump back to the earlier question around the funding? I was just doing a wee bit of looking up there. So yeah, both the Next Generation Fund and the Women in Agriculture Fund, they work off their eligible courses are those listed on Skills Hub Scotland, and I have just had a look, and the Muirburn practitioner is listed on Skills Hub Scotland, so therefore it would suggest okay to apply. So what I'll do is, just in case anybody hasn't heard of those funds, there obviously are, you know, restrictions for the Next Generation, for example, if we started in the last 5 years, but I'll pop the links into the chat. And yeah, just worth noting that for the training, if you know it is a younger person, maybe around the Next Generation, if they're 16 to 18, they do need to have somebody else with them on the course. But all that detail is online, so I'll pop the links into the chat now for anybody who they'd be useful for.
That's great, Mary. Thanks so much for that. And we've just been looking at a lot of the technology, and we've got a question about the digitally excluded. How will it be ensured that people who are not computer literate have access to the training and the application process?
So through a number of things, engagement like this, where we will try and hold these events that we can guide individuals. We will also be in due course producing a video showing you how to go through the application process. Fundamentally though, if you absolutely can't do that, then you are still able to phone NatureScot and speak to us and see what support we can give you, and see how we can help you in providing that application.
And maybe what's part of the activities when we're advertising as part of the Muirburn, the Farm Advisory Service, we maybe had the numbers, so we're not harassing you directly, Bjorn. That would be useful.
Yeah. Yes.
We've got a question about how we actually apply on the license. Can we use the Farm BioScot app to apply, or is it a different software?
No, unfortunately not. It's a direct application through this online system.
That's excellent. So you're going to get tormented by my questions until the participants put a few more in the Q&A box, Bjorn. I was wondering, so you've got your bamboo cane and you've done your peat depth. What do you need to do to capture the depth of it? Do you just need to like take a notebook and say like, well, that one was 35 centimeters, or do we need to take photos, or what needs to be done for the evidence gathering?
It fundamentally, and I'm going back to sharing my screen. Bear with me 1 second. So fundamentally, that from that mapping tool I showed you, when you get in that white box, it says "Get Survey Results." If you click on that, it will download the spreadsheet for you. It will provide you with the grid reference, and when you go out in the field with your canes or whatever it is you're going to use, you slide them into the ground and you record that whatever depth you got to on them, and you just fill them in as you go from there. This obviously is a bit of paper out in the natural environment, so not easy, granted. Some of the other sort of GPS apps, etc., if people are getting really techie, you would be able to record it there. Fundamentally, though, this comes back to what I was saying to you before. This is the data that you need to provide back to us, and this here is what the computer will suck the information from. It talks about distance from point, and that's just to do with that grid reference it gives you could be on top of a massive boulder, and we're not expecting you to sample a boulder. So you go to the nearest point that you would get a probe in, and then you just put it in, and then you just tell it that it wasn't exactly on the point, and it will just have regard for that with some special computer geekery.
Fantastic. Okay, we've got a question. If you want to burn on peatland to restore the natural environment, what evidence is required?
I would suggest quite a lot, because there is very limited evidence that burning on peatland puts you in a position that you're restoring the natural environment. Because don't forget that the natural environment on peatland is a water-based system. It's a large peatland system. What we're not looking to restore is grasses and sort of shallow heather, etc., for grazing purposes. So you would need to provide quite a bit. If you are going to apply for that purpose, again, I suggest maybe getting in touch with us first to discuss what your thoughts are. By all means, please do apply, and then we can kind of look at the evidence. But it guides you, the application system guides you through some of the questions that we're looking for, and it is based around what you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to restore, and what your kind of end target is. So, you're trying to get the ecosystem in this position by so many years or whatever it might be.
Jeanette, sorry, I was just going to add a question in around sort of time frame for applications. So Bjorn acknowledged earlier that a lot of the time the Muirburn happens later in the season when conditions are more favourable. Does the system close? Is there a certain time that people need to have their applications in to be processed? Does it remain open once the Muirburn season is open? Just a bit of clarity there would be helpful.
So once it goes live, the application system in effect will be live throughout the year. So obviously, apart from when it needs to be upgraded or anything like that. So you can apply at any point for an in-season license. So what that means is that you're applying for that Muirburn season or seasons in the future, because you can do it up to 5 years. There are occasions where you may apply for an out-of-season license. And again, the Muirburn Act provides purposes for that. But just bear in mind that they are reduced purposes. They are all required to be proven to be necessary, whether it's on peatland or non-peatland. And that it will be a separate application system. It won't be through the main Muirburn license system. In effect, what we will be doing is hoping to issue licenses for up to 5 seasons for in-season Muirburn, so you have that continuity and know what you're doing. For out-of-season, because it's exceptional, it'll be on a case-by-case basis for that out-of-season.
Super.
Fantastic. So we've got a question now. Is there some idea about what enforcement looks like? Presumably, there'll have to be some sort of bedding in period while land managers adapt to the requirements. But what is the expectations of the likes of Police Scotland or other agencies' involvement?
I think yes, there is a bedding in period. I think that comes back to what we're saying, slightly iterative process. Fundamentally, what the law tells you that you have to do is have a license. So if you don't have a license, that's when you're probably going to get into trouble by the police, etc. But if you have a license, what it asks you to do then is have regard to the Muirburn Code. And having regard to the Muirburn Code means that you try and follow it unless there are exceptional circumstances that you can't, or there are exceptional circumstances that would benefit from you not following it. So what would that look like? In general terms, I think we are not looking to be overt and not looking to scrutinise every single thing you do. But fundamentally, you absolutely need to be licensed and you absolutely need to have trained personnel. And if you don't, you need to speak to us about that. In terms of the sort of Police Scotland's remit, etc., that's where it will come down to. It will come down to the specific statutory requirements, by that, the legal or the laws that are in place. In terms of then general licensing and following the conditions of the license, etc., that will be down to NatureScot. We definitely would take a progressive approach to that, in the sense that we would, if someone's got a minor misdemeanor because they don't understand what's going on, we would certainly spend some time and talk to them about it and explain what they would need to do. If it gets, progressively worse and they've just had blatant disregard to everything, then clearly we would ramp up our sort of statutory powers that we could use.
Oh, excellent, thank you. Now we've got a question again, like what would happen if a license wasn't granted, but then there was a genuine wildfire occurs and caused a lot of damage, and there was no sheep and it was not suitable for sheep and cattle grazing anymore. So I think people are concerned about the licensing and traditional practicing stopping, and what would happen in that case if traditional practices had to stop because they weren't able to be licensed, and the knock-on effects of that.
Unfortunately, I'm not going to come up with a trite answer on that. I think it'll be a fact of what happens at a point. And the honest answer is, I don't know. But what I do know is that there won't be a specific, here's a compensation process or anything like that. Ultimately, it is for the license requester to prove the necessity or the requirement as we go forward. So yeah, that's not an easy answer to give, but that's where it stands. I don't think there is a specific liability against anyone on that case.
And maybe before we move on to the next questions, I think I'm quite clear now about the non-peatland and how you'd go about applying for a license. If you had a situation where, like, it was traditionally, it was peatland and there was nobody was arguing with that. It was over the 40 centimeters, and they'd traditionally been doing Muirburn for a variety of reasons, mostly livestock, but also for habitat management purposes. How would they go about applying for a license? What options could they pick?
They could only apply for the 5 licensable purposes that are provided in the law for peatland. So 2 of which are wildfire purposes, prevention or reducing the risk to people or habitats, and preventing and reducing the risk to property. Then there's restoration, research, and training. I would suggest that there are very few people, unless you are involved in a proper research proposal, that will be doing that. In terms of training, that is very specific. It'll be a very limited area, and it'll be a case of, if you only had peatland available and Bright Spark were to come out, that would be the only place they could train you. So that really limits your options. We've already discussed restoration, so really that puts it to wildfire purposes. So you would need to consider what risks are presented by not burning that area. But to be clear, because your question was categorised for that for livestock, etc., the law does not provide for that.
That's really helpful, thank you. The other question that we've got is about one of those reasons. Would damage by heather beetle qualify as nature restoration, as if it's not burnt, you run the risk of grasses swamping out the regenerating heather?
Heather beetle is one that keeps coming up. All the scientific evidence, and there is if you Google it, there's a Natural England scientific paper on it, shows that burning for heather beetle can be more detrimental than leaving it alone. Fundamentally, because burning for heather beetle, what you do is you burn off all the dead heather, etc., and actually leave the ground exposed for those grasses, probably millennia, which is pretty unpalatable to anything. On top of that, what you do is you create a landscape where all the heather is of the same age. So actually, when the heather beetle resurges, it further destroys that heather. So where we stand on restoration for heather beetle on current evidence is that it is not appropriate. Now, we have suggested to representative organisations that we would accept a research proposal, but that has to be pre-planned by a proper research institute as such, in terms of the effects of Muirburn on heather beetle. So that is one for others to pick up and look to do a research proposal. But as it stands, no.
And we've got a question looking for clarification again on, I think, the Muirburn licensing on peatland. Just to be clear, managing and maintaining extensive livestock units, which are environmentally friendly and capturing carbon and providing the base for biodiversity ever since we as humans started managing hills on peat, is not a qualifying reason for burning on peatland.
Just to be clear, burning peatland or burning vegetation on peatland for managing livestock is not a legal prescription within the Act.
That's an answer. Might not be a popular one, but it's important that the message is out. Okay. We're talking again about the nature restoration, and would burning to control tick be similar to the heather beetle situation? Because I suppose there's a human and animal health benefits about managing tick populations.
I'm sure there are, but is that restoring the natural environment?
Not for the ticks. It would be eradicating the ticks, to be fair.
But in general, I don't think that will be qualifying, and we've been quite specific on peatlands here. So I would say unlikely. And again, a lot of the grouse estates, etc., deploy sheep to use as tick mops, etc., rather than doing it the other way around. So yeah, I doubt it.
And just while there's waiting for a few more questions to come in, I was wanting to ask a bit more about the wildfire mitigation burning.
Yes.
So is that something that people can apply for on non-peatland and peatland at this moment in time?
Yes, absolutely. So you can apply for non-peatland and peatland. In effect, it'll ask you a similar process and ask you for the detail. And the reason it asks you for the same detail for both is to understand your overall plan, so that we can understand whether that peatland element is necessary. Fundamentally, though, for the peatland side of things, that's the most likely thing that you're going to apply for peatland. If you are a livestock farmer, holder, crofter, and you are non-peatland, then your priority will be to apply for a non-peatland purpose for livestock improvement. But yeah, something to be aware of. One of the questions will come back to you if you mix peatland and non-peatlanders. Why can't you achieve this on non-peatland? Or we'll look at the maps and see if there would be a suitable non-peatland area, etc. But the law is definitely more protective of peatland and restrictive of burning of peatland.
But if you were in a situation where you had like a native woodland area and it was surrounded by mostly or all peatland for this scenario, it would be possible that if you were wanting to have a fire break around the woodland area to prevent wildfire coming in, so you were able to fight the fire to protect your trees, that is the sort of thing that you could apply for wildfire mitigation on a peatland area for. Yes,
absolutely. So as long as you can show that there's something at risk, it could be a steading. It could be because that's the property element. It could be a village. It could be native woodland, as you've indicated, and you show that there's a risk, i.e., we've got this area of high fuel load, and therefore what we want to do is create a fire break or an area of reduced vegetation so we can manage that fuel load, and that's the area we would control or catch the fire before it got into that at-risk area. Then yes, that's absolutely the way we'd be looking at you sort of being licensed for it.
We've got, I think this is again falls into more of a comment than a question. So what is required as creative writing?
I don't agree. I think what is required is, in effect, a risk assessment, and therefore, if you identify the risk, can evidence the risk to us, you can evidence that there is that fire triangle, there's fuel, there's everything that's going to create a problem, then you shouldn't really have difficulty in doing it. I think the big thing is people forget is scale. Do you need to burn the 1,000 acres of peatland to protect that singular barn, or do you need to burn 100 meters all the way around it, or whatever it might be?
But I suppose one of the challenges for people who've been doing Muirburn for a long time with their lives is just thinking about looking at it through a different viewpoint for when you're thinking about doing the licensing purposes.
Yeah, I think that probably is actually the core point to get across. Fundamentally, a law has been brought in and how Muirburn is done and how it's controlled has changed significantly. So the status quo is not the same anymore, and therefore, if you want to continue doing this, you need to adapt and overcome, and you need to start looking at it in line with what the law allows you to do.
Excellent. We've got a question on the changing Muirburn season. The biggest problem for farmers and gamekeepers is the closing 1 month early. In many years, we'll have no chance to burn due to it not being dry enough.
Yes, yes, that is what the law has done. I did mention the out of season element. Now, you're not going to get carte blanche just to do it out of season for all your purposes just because it wasn't dry enough. However, for things like wildfire risk, etc., if you can prove the necessity, because everything becomes necessary in terms of the law for out of season, then you should still be able to catch up those elements. But yeah, it will be a challenge.
And following on from that, if you applied for a license, how long does the license last? Like, say if you hit a very wet season and you couldn't burn that year, can you just roll it over and do it the next year, or do you have to keep reapplying for the licenses?
So you can apply, and you're like for up to 5 years. So within the license application, it'll ask you how many seasons you'd like the license for, and it will give you a maximum of 5 years.
Okay, so you've got a bit of flexibility then. That's good.
Absolutely. And quite frankly, if you are like, and a good example comes back to these wildfire things, etc., if you are actually looking to burn for wildfire purposes and all the rest of it, if you can show that this is my overall plan, then across the 5 years, it will make more sense.
And we've got a question about the processing. How long will the license take to process?
I
know you haven't done one. I know you haven't done one yet. But
I'll be lying if I could tell you. I think initially they're going to take a lot longer than once we get into the swing of it. What we will like to do is obviously we're not going to just view licenses as they come in isolation. So we're going to look at it, make a decision, then as a team go through them again and debate whether that decision is right or wrong and all the rest of it. So the initial license applications will take longer than once we're up and running and established. What we intend to do is once we do have licenses in place and we've started granting them, that we will put out some case studies to help people understand how it's worked and not worked. That doesn't specifically answer your question. So how long will it take? I mean, ideally, we'd get to a point where we'd be able to turn around in sort of a 2 to 3 week window, but initially it could take a lot longer. The other unknown to us at the moment is how many license applications we will receive, immediately, or whether it will just drift in over time.
I think we've done well. I think we've covered the points that we set out to cover. We've covered a lot of the changes that have happened to Muirburn and why we need licenses. You've introduced us to the online peatland map, and Jeanette's realised that there's a lot more work to peat probing than I had first realised. So that's been very educational. We know about the training requirements and both the online and the practical training, and in the chat there's some information about some potential funding sources that could help with that. And we've covered that that everybody at a Muirburn needs to be licensed, not just the main organizer. Is that correct, Bjorn? And
that's correct. Yeah.
And we've covered a few different examples and covered that livestock grazing alone is not going to be a good enough reason on peatland areas. So we've covered all that. And would you like to leave us a few handy tips when making your application, now that people have seen the process as a whole? What would be, if people were thinking of starting one after this webinar, what would be your top tips for a smooth and stress-free process?
Top tips. I don't think you should try and do it all in a one. So, it is a computer system and it is, a lot of questions, etc. So by all means, just get to a point, save it, walk away and come back and top it up. Fundamental and basic tip, and probably the most important one, is apply for your primary purpose or primary purposes. Don't confuse yourself by going, well, I'm doing all of these things, and I'm sure we could debate that till the cows come home, in the sense of, yes, I'm sure you're doing a bit of restoration, I'm sure you're doing a bit of whatever. Apply for your primary purpose, because that will make your life easier, because it will give you the focus in terms of what evidence you're trying to provide and what information you're trying to provide. And then therefore you don't need to go down the creative writing route. So that would be my 2 top tips. And the third tip would be, don't feel obliged that you need to apply for your whole holding on the first year. There will be an amendment process available. You will be able to come to us subsequently and say, I would like you to add in, this area or that area, etc. Or I now have this peatland data or non-peatland data and like to add it in. So all of those things you'll be able to do further down the line.
Great. So the bite-size approach it in bite-size chunk. The area that's the most clear cut to be, and then maybe a smallish area to apply for first until you become familiar with this process yourself, and then that can always be added to for the rest of the in future times.
Yes.
Great. And would it be possible for you to share a link of the peatland and non-peatland map with the call, please?
So I have, it's in the chat window now. So
fantastic.
And I just confirm that webpage link that we've circulated with the attendees, that is where the license process or the system will get added into once it's live. So that will still just be the one page that people need to know about. Or is that
I can't guarantee that, Mario. I don't know. I'll have to speak to I imagine it will definitely be on the NatureScot website. It will definitely be linked to that page, but it probably will have a page on its own, which I will share with you in due course, that you can sort of
That's
send.
fine. But even if it is at least linked, then if people have saved that first web link from the start of the chat tonight, then they don't need to worry about starting from square one. It should at least be somewhere linked. So that's maybe a useful one to keep in bookmarks.
No, it will definitely get linked within there, and then it'll take you to the next page, if that makes sense.
Super. Thank you.
That's fantastic. So will we do a last call for questions? Because Bjorn's been very generous with his time, and really appreciate all the extra information that we have from him this evening. But if you want to put him on the spot for the last wee bit, that would be no problem at all.
What I would say then, while we're waiting for people to put me on the spot, is that actually you'll go away from this and then go, oh, I've just thought of this and I wish I'd asked it. Please feed it back, and via FAS, or come directly to us and ask us those questions. But if you feed it back to FAS, they will get in touch with me and I'll be able to give those answers and get them back to you as required.
I think the group has been very kind to you, Bjorn. I don't think anybody's going to put you on the spot with any more mean questions. So I think we'll give a few more minutes, but then I think we'll be calling a halt tonight. But I would like to really thank you for being so generous with your time and knowledge with us. It's been very, very interesting. And I'd really like to thank all the participants who's come and asked so many thought-provoking and interesting questions. And yes, and like Bjorn said, we'll be doing an edited version of this video, so you'll be able to refer to it again when you're doing your licensing. But if there's any other questions that pop to mind later on, just get in touch with us at the Farm Advisory Service, or get in touch with me directly, and we'll make sure that we get all these queries sorted before either before or as soon as possible after the licensing system is launched.